Hello Crochet is the Way viewers, and welcome newcomers. Today I'm going to show you how to make this giant 2-round square made with super thick Plarn plastic yarn recycled from grocery bags. I'll show you very quickly, just in case you need an example of how to make this material. I'm using the loop method. It makes a double strand material, and you would cut off the tops and the bottoms of the bags. And here I have my material is about 4 inches or 10 centimeters wide. I only have to make 3 cuts in a bag to finish it off. So I'm getting rid of my bag supply very quickly by making these squares, and you could use them to create quite a few things, I think. To join the material together, you put the end of one loop through another and take the tail of that loop and run it through. Now I've showed you this in pictures on the blog. You see, if you let it go like that, it takes a long time to pull it through. If you make a point to only pull it through so far, hold it tight, take your tail, put it through, and pull it, it goes very quickly. Pull tight for a nice smooth knot. And if that doesn't work out, you can open it up like that to help tighten it, or you might want to check to make sure you don't have too much slack on one side of another loop. That often causes a sloppy knot. Before we begin, I'll also show you, because I'm trying to make a nice solid square that doesn't have too many gaps, because you can see using a double crochet stitch and this huge material already makes quite a big gap. I originally tried this pattern the way you would typically make a square, with chain spaces for the corners, and it left gaps so big I can fit my hand through them. We don't want that. If you were just using this to make a floor mat, something similar, I think you could get away with using chain spaces for corners. But because I don't want that, I'll show you this pattern, where we'll start with a circle and turn it into a square on the second round. And I'll also show you, in case you want to continue the pattern, we're going to begin and end on a corner, so you could easily continue working. But I'm just making these simple 2-round squares. And we're making them with finger crochet, no hook. However, if you're uncomfortable with this method and you happen to have a hook that's about the same size as your finger, then feel free to use that. I'm not exactly sure what size hook this is. It's not marked. I know it's larger than a size P. So, I'll even show you how to begin with no slip knot. If you wanted to make a magic circle or magic loop, whichever you call it, you could do that, but I find it is so easy to start this way. You're working yarn, or Plarn actually, but I will call it yarn here. Your working yarn should be over the front of your finger, and bring your tail in front of the working yarn. Grab that to hold it secure. Yarn over your finger just like you would for a hook, but make sure that you keep this loop nice and loose. You don't want tight tension here. So if you're a tight tensioner, I know I am, The first couple of times you try this, you're going to have trouble pulling through loops. Make the same motion you would as if you were using a hook, but do it with your finger. You need to rotate down and back up. That's chain 1. And if you started without a slip knot, mind that you hold that tight until you get that stitch secure. Yarn over again, and you might notice sometimes I work my thumb into that stitch to help grab that yarn. It's a big help. And we'll start the pattern with just chain 2. We're going to skip over that. It's not going to count as a double crochet stitch. We're not going to chain 3 and make a huge gap that looks sloppy. We're going to skip that chain 2 and it smooshes to the back. Now for your first double crochet, here's the big one. Yarn over your finger, insert your finger in that farthest loop, the first loop made. That's where we're going to be making all of our stitches. Pull up that loop so that it's the same height as the rest of the loops. Yarn over, and you'll see I often hold the stitch with my thumb because with this big material and the loose loops of finger crochet, they like to pop off your finger. Yarn over and pull through 2 loops, and you can split right in the middle of that stitch with your thumb if it makes it easier. Rotate around and back up. Now yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops. There's your first double crochet. Now making all the stitches in that beginning loop, that's going to open up on you a little bit. Keep in mind, plarn can break. The harder you have to pull on it to tighten that loop, the more chances you're going to have of breaking it. So as you work around, try to keep that loop tight while you work over your tail. And doing that will save you time in the end. You won't have to go back to weave in your beginning tail. You just have the last one left over when you finish. As I work my stitches, I'll explain because I forgot to in the beginning. I've found that with the 4-inch wide material, it takes me exactly 18 bags to make one square. And then I need about the length of 1 extra loop from a bag to make material to weave in at the end. Otherwise, it's just short. It stops at exactly 18 bags. If you cut yours a little bit differently, or if your gauge is different than mine, you might need more or less than that. So what I have already prepared, and I'm such a nerd that I even roll it into a center pole ball, I go ahead and I cut 20 bags all at one time. And it leaves me with a little extra with every square. So hopefully one day when I make enough squares, I won't have to cut any bags for that square. I'll just have all the material ready. Now on our very last stitch, I've lost count. I'm going to show you how to work the tail up if you're not familiar with that. Here we go. Make sure after you pull up the first loop of the stitch, pull that tail as tight as you can without breaking the material. We want a nice small space there, as small as possible. Okay, go ahead and yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops of the stitch. Bring the tail up over your working yarn to the back, yarn over, pull through the last 2 loops of the stitch, and then there is that beginning chain 2. That doesn't count as a stitch, so don't let that fool you. I'm going to count one more time just to make sure. I always double check, because if I don't, I know I make a mistake. Find the first double crochet that you made. Insert your finger, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And I find that this is so tricky with finger crochet, because when you try to make a slip stitch through that working loop, it tries to pull off your finger. But we only have to do that once around. So there you go. 12 double crochet, the first round of the square. Now we're going to turn it into a square. And bring that tail forward. We're going to work over that. We want to lock it in there on that first stitch. We'll chain 2 again to begin the second round, but again, that does not count as a double crochet. You can bring your tail back around and we'll just work over it into the rest of the stitches. It locks in there nice and solid. Yarn over and make a double crochet in the first stitch, and I'm going to pay attention. I want to work into the post space itself and not just into the top of the stitch, because that makes the pattern a little more solid with this material that can break easily. This beginning stitch will be part of your first corner, but it's not going to be a whole corner yet. The reason we're working it this way is in case you want to continue another round. Only make 1 double crochet in that stitch, and then when you come around again, you'll make 2 more double crochet behind it over the beginning chain 2. And if that confuses you, just follow along. I don't always explain things the best way. We will make 3 double crochet in the next stitch, and that's the second half of that corner. We'll finish making that corner at the end of the round. And it won't look like a corner yet. In the next stitch, make 2 double crochet, and that will be the middle of your first side. And then already this pattern goes so quickly into the next corner. The first half of the corner, make 3 double crochet, and for the second half of the corner in the next stitch, make 3 more double crochet. And I've almost finished working over my tail, if you haven't noticed that it's still back there. I think you'll find if you don't do that, it takes a little extra time in the end to weave it in, but if you miss it, don't worry about it. You can always go back and weave it in. The middle of the second side, we make 2 double crochet in the next stitch, and already into another corner. The first half of the corner, 3 double crochet, second half of the corner. Three double crochet. And if you'll give me just a second, my material is popping into the frame. There we go. Another side. 2 stitches. I really do think that here you could get away with just making 1 stitch instead of 2. But because I want my square to be so solid, that's why I've put 2 stitches in the middle of the side. Once you join them together, it squishes up. When it's just a square, it looks a little bit roundish, but it becomes a square. Don't worry about that. Starting another corner, 3 double crochet, and 3 double crochet in the next stitch. Now, almost finished. One more side. We make 2 double crochet, then to finish that first corner we started, let me straighten this out just a bit so you can see better what I'm doing. This is where you might want to use a marker, beginners, or if you have trouble finding the beginning of your round. That blends in a little there. Here's your chain 2, and here's the first double crochet we made in that first stitch. Working right over that chain 2 in front of it in the same stitch, make 2 more double crochet. Now skipping over that chain 2, find the first double crochet and slip stitch to join the round. Now I'll show you quickly that the material does ruffle up a little bit due to that extra stitch, but because of the material, all you need to do is the equivalent of blocking, except there's not much blocking you can do with plastic yarn other than pull it into shape. Give it a little squish. Once they're joined together, that extra stitch blends in. The material flattens out over time too, so it all squishes together. It looks a bit strange at first. You can already see it coming into shape. Now I'll show you quickly also, I'm not going to be working another round. These squares are somewhere, I think, around 9 inches wide. Oh, 10 inches wide. 25 centimeters. They're pretty big. You could do a lot with that. You could make 5 of them, 1 for a bottom, 4 for each side, 4 for the sides, and turn it into a bag. That's one of the ideas that I've had for these, to make reusable grocery bags. Except they do have large gaps in them, so obviously that's not going to work for small items. You're going to lose your things, but for larger things, canned items in boxes. I think it would be a great idea, and it sure eats up that bag supply if you've got them sitting around like I do. I have a corner that is nothing but bags, in more bags. You can either, to begin another corner if you want to, work right into the stitch itself, or you can make all of your stitches in that corner. But you would begin the same way we did the first round. And that leaves your choices a little bit limited, because you can see here's your 3 double crochet and 3 double crochet of the corner. If you begin another corner, then you'll want to do 1 double crochet here, 3 more double crochet here, and then when you work around, you'll put your last 2 double crochet right there. If you want to work it into the stitch itself, it gets a little off right there, so I do recommend putting it into all in one space. But then you start running into the large gaps like you do with chain spaces. It's not as bad as a chain space. So, I'll show you quickly how you can either weave in the ends with your fingers, or you can grab a small hook, well, large hook really, but I'll show you with my fingers because we haven't had a hook yet, so we don't really need one now, do we? Here's your working loop that you pull the yarn out of, and here's your next stitch. Pull the tail through that stitch, and from the top side, so you'll insert your finger back into that working loop from the bottom up. Pull that tail through, and there you have an invisible join on your square. From there, work the tail to the back, and you can be pretty sloppy with Plarn projects. The plastic yarn blends into itself. You don't see as much definition as you do with fiber projects. I'm going to grab a hook. Sorry, I'm cheating. And I'll show you why I'm going to grab a hook, because I can go into the base loops of my stitches, at least I think I can, it's fighting me, and I can pick up a whole row with a hook, where I can't do that with my finger. See how I'm squishing it together to do that? It's one of the great things about this material. But to do that on my finger hurts, so we don't want to hurt ourselves, right? That is another thing you need to keep in mind. If you have arthritis, any kind of injury to your hands, carpal tunnel, things like that, this might not be the project for you. It does put quite a lot of strain on your hands. You might be able to more easily use a hook for this project, because there is a lot of moving of your fingers to do this, and then you have to have the material looped on there and the strain of pulling it through. It gets tiring. I find I only want to make a few of these squares a day. Between having to cut the material up, because it takes longer to make the material than it does to make the square, and then making your hands tired making the square, it gets old. Not complaining, just being honest. Don't think you're going to sit down and make 20 of these in a day. If you do, then you're awesome. But don't plan on it. Don't hurt yourself. Now, like I told you before, that extra stitch in the side does make it round out. Once you've played with it a few times, stretched it, squish it back together on the side, it takes a nice square shape, and once it's joined together, those edges smush together and you have a nice solid square pattern. A lot better than these big gaps. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it helps you recycle some plastic bags, and maybe it will help you donate to charity, because if you follow me on the Crochet is the Way blog, you'll get to watch me progress through this project. I'll be turning these eventually into sleeping mats for the homeless, and we'll be donating them. I would love to see other people working on this project. Let's do some recycling and let's help some people out. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.